Brent will be taking over operations effective immediately, Carl said, tapping the polished oak table like it owed him money. Fresh perspective. Harvard MBA. Bloodline you can trust. The silence in that conference room wasn't silence, it was a polite corporate aneurysm. My fingers were still resting on the leather-bound compliance folder when I heard the word bloodline. Like we were royalty, and this was Game of Thrones, but with more khakis and fewer morals. I turned a page in my notes. Didn't even blink. Brent, sitting to Carl's left with his tie askew and his ego choking the oxygen out of the room, shot me this pity smirk like I was some kind of office antique. The kind you don't throw out, just shuffle into storage while you Google a more modern solution. Let me back up. My name's Emily, and for 12 years, I was the director of risk and compliance at Midline Freight Logistics. You've probably never heard of us, but if you've ever bought furniture that showed up intact and on time, there's a decent chance I had something to do with that. I built the internal frameworks that held this company together. My systems, my teams, my contract clauses, my damn blood pressure. And now, Carl had decided all that experience was obsolete because his sister's kid once gave a TEDx talk about disrupting the shipping paradigm. That's when Carl said it, loud enough that even the janitor pretending not to eavesdrop probably winced. My nephew's more qualified. I swear, he said it like it was a mic drop. Like Brent's overpriced education had already done more than my 12 years of pulling this company back from the brink every time someone else screwed up. Now listen, I know how these stories usually go. Woman gets disrespected, yells in a meeting, flips the table, storms out to bay and say, "That's not what happened." I just smiled, clicked my pen and kept taking notes. Because when someone shows you their cards, you don't throw your own down, you memorize theirs, quietly. Also, real quick, if you've made it this far and you like stories where arrogant suits crash and burn under their own egos, go ahead and tap that subscribe button or like this story. It helps our team keep these tales rolling in, and trust me, this one only gets messier. Brent introduced himself with a "hey guys" like he was at a dorm mixer, not sitting at the helm of operations for a $300 million freight company. I clocked the nervous twitch in his jaw, the way he didn't meet the eyes of the heads of departments, and the PowerPoint he pulled up, let's just say it had more gifs than graphs. Carl was glowing like a gas leak. Emily's going to be taking a well-earned backseat while Brent drives innovation forward. Backseat. That was rich. I'd written the emergency protocols that had kept this company from federal audits twice. I'd negotiated insurance clauses so bulletproof, our competitors tried to copy them and still ended up paying double in premiums. But now I was background noise to a frat boy with spreadsheet allergies. I closed my notebook gently, nodded to no one in particular, and said, happy to support the transition. Carl grinned like he'd won. Brent looked confused, maybe even relieved, and me? I'd already filed the first memory in a mental folder I titled, Their Funeral Volume I. What they didn't know, what they hadn't even thought to ask, was that the company's most important client contract had a section written by yours truly. And that clause didn't just require my signature. It required me. But I wasn't going to tell them that. Not today, not yet. Sometimes the best revenge doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with a silence so calm, people mistake it for surrender. Let them promote their bloodline. Let them believe their own press release. I'd already planted the landmine. All I had to do was wait for them to step on it. The HR call came 2 days later, exactly as I figured. They scheduled it for 4:15 p.m., late enough that the building would be half empty, early enough that they could still clock out without bumping into me in the parking garage. Corporate cowardice wears beige walls and motivational posters like armor. Emily, Cheryl from HR began, eyes flicking to the folder in front of her like it might attack. We've done a careful analysis of department overlap, and we're moving in a different direction. Different direction. The phrase HR uses when they're holding a knife and pretending it's a handshake. Carl was there too, of course, leaning back in the corner chair like he was watching reruns of a sitcom he'd already spoiled. His smirk was part condescension, part relief, like my firing was a gastric event he'd finally passed. We've crafted a severance package we feel is fair, Cheryl said. The packet slid across the table like a drink bill after a date you didn't enjoy. 2 weeks' pay. No extension on benefits. A signed NDA buried in fine print. And the cherry on top. Clause that said I'd waive rights to contest recent operational changes, like my removal was just a game of musical chairs and not a premeditated gutting. I flipped through the pages slowly, nodding. So just to be clear, I said, calm as a coma, this is the whole package? Carl cleared his throat. Look, Em, this is just how business evolves. Brent's already proven himself capable, and we don't want this to get messy. You've got a solid reputation. It'd be best if we kept it that way. That was the moment the heat behind my eyes turned to ice. Not because I was hurt, hell, I'd seen this coming since Carl started calling Brent our next big thing, but because he'd just made the mistake of talking to me like I was a threat in remission. I signed the paperwork. No flinching. No teary monologue about loyalty or fairness. I signed it like I was approving a purchase order for toner. Then I leaned back, folded the pen neatly into the folder, and asked, may I have a printed copy for my records? Cheryl blinked like I'd asked for her kidney. Yes, sure, of course. Carl stood up fast like the room was on fire. Well, good luck, Em, seriously, no hard feelings. He extended a hand. I looked at it for a second too long, then stood, collected my things, and walked past him without shaking it. If he was going to erase me from his vision of the company, he could get used to watching my back as I left. Just before stepping into the elevator, I did one last thing. There's this whiteboard outside the strategy conference room, an ugly old thing with coffee smudges and ghosted markers from meetings past. They'd recently scribbled out a project schedule for Q3 contract adjustments. Names, dates, arrows. I took out my phone, snapped a photo. One of the listed action items read, Review PIL Clause 11.4 Who owns it post-transition? Interesting question. I took the stairs down, all 9 floors. Needed the rhythm of my boots on concrete to work through the fog curling around my ribs. Because even if you see the punch coming, it still knocks the wind out of you. 12 years, boxed into a manila folder and a parking validation. But somewhere between floor 6 and 5, that quiet devastation began to shift. Not into rage, that's too loud. Into calculation, that's colder, smarter. They thought I'd go quietly because I didn't scream, because I didn't claw or beg or throw down a resignation manifesto. But I wasn't walking away. I was waiting. And somewhere inside that building, a time bomb with my signature on it was still ticking. They didn't even clear out my office right away, just swapped the nameplate and called it Operations Strategy. As if renaming it could bleach out the 12 years of coffee stains, fire drills, and late-night contract reviews, written under deadline with my shoes off and a heating pad across my back. Brent moved in the next day, rolled up in a Patagonia vest and loafers with no socks, clutching a to-go smoothie like it was a weaponized personality trait. He stood in the doorway of what used to be my office and announced, "Let's make this place a little less." 2009. By noon, he'd already dismantled 2 of the internal audit workflows, said they were bureaucratic fat and paralysis by analysis, which is Ivy League for I don't understand what any of this does, so I'll delete it and hope nothing catches fire. By the end of the week, he'd removed 5 layers of compliance checks I'd built after a near-fatal logistics error 5 years ago, the same checks that had saved the company from a $12 million liability. But those stories weren't in his case studies. Carl clapped him on the back like a proud dad at a JV basketball game. Finally, Carl said during a team huddle, "We've got some real innovation around here." Innovation, in this case, meant color-coded Slack channels and a 30-minute brainstorming session titled Disrupting Freight Culture. Meanwhile, the inbox I no longer had access to began leaking its problems. My old assistant texted me once. They just forwarded a claim to Brent and he told the carrier to circle back after brunch. I didn't respond, didn't need to, it was already happening. But where it got interesting, eerily interesting, was my LinkedIn. First, the views started climbing. 10, 20, then 80 in 2 days. Then came the messages, old vendors, a former boss, a guy I hadn't spoken to since I shut down a false billing scheme in 17. Some were vague, "Hey, heard you're exploring new opportunities, would love to connect." Others were sharper, "You were the backbone over there, we all knew it. If you're free to chat, I've got something in the works." One stuck out like a paper cut, a man named Nate Harper, senior analyst, Precision Interstate Logistics. The client, he hadn't messaged, just viewed my profile 3 times in 48 hours. No words, just watching, and me? I didn't reply to anyone, no thank you notes, no lunch dates, no passive-aggressive status updates about exciting new chapters. I just waited, let the ripples hit the edges of the pool. Because here's the thing about good compliance work, real, airtight risk systems. They don't blow up overnight, they decay, slowly. They rot from the inside out. And the people who cut out the guardrails don't even realize they're plummeting until they're halfway to the canyon floor. Brent kept pushing, removed a third-party verification team that took 6 months to vet, scrapped quarterly reporting, called them redundant spend, started fast-tracking carrier approvals with gut checks. I watched it all from the outside, like someone watching their old house catch fire, but knowing they'd removed the propane tanks long before anyone lit the match. I started sleeping better. No buzzing from urgent emails. No late-night texts from Carl demanding we massage the language on reports to make it investor-friendly. No HR whispering about optics when I flagged real concerns. Just quiet. The void they thought they could fill with buzzwords and nepotism. But voids echo, and somewhere, in that echo chamber of stripped-down systems and half-baked leadership, the sound of a clause, section 11.4, page 73, was starting to whisper. I wasn't going to say a word, that clause was patient. And so was I. It came on a Tuesday, buried between a spam email from a wellness retreat I never signed up for and a receipt for a $6 cappuccino I barely remembered drinking. Subject, quick question, PIL compliance. The sender, Nate Harper, Precision Interstate Logistics. The client, their client. He kept it short. Barely 2 lines. Hey Emily, hope you're well. Off the record, did you ever sign off on the new liability structure for the Ridgefield expansion? Brent mentioned something, but I can't find your name anywhere on it. There it was. The whisper. barely audible through the noise of corporate momentum, but sharp enough to slice clean through the fog. I sipped what was left of my lukewarm coffee and reread it, then clicked reply. You should probably read page 73 of the contract, I typed. Look for section 11.4. Then I hit send. No smiley face. No signature line. No elaboration, just enough rope. 10 minutes later, he viewed my LinkedIn profile again. Then a third time. I imagined him flipping through a digital contract the size of a novella, full of boilerplate and legalese, until he hit the sentence. Any alteration, termination, or reassignment of director-level oversight regarding risk and liability must be reviewed and approved in writing by both parties no fewer than 60 days in advance. Termination without such notice shall constitute a breach of contract, subject to immediate suspension of coverage and services. My name was right there in the margin. Drafted by me, proved by both legal teams, countersigned by their general counsel, and sealed with an addendum from the year we renegotiated their bundled liability policy. Brent hadn't signed off on anything, because Brent didn't even know it existed. Carl had skipped the review process entirely, thinking the contract was just another dusty tome filed away in digital storage, same as all the other documents he never bothered reading past the executive summary. Nate didn't reply right away. He wouldn't, not while he was confirming with legal, not while he was calculating the potential fallout if that clause had in fact been violated. And I went back to my puzzle, a 2,000-piece landscape of the Dolomites. I placed a sky piece into a jagged corner, listened to the click, and let the silence fill the room. That's the thing about being good at risk. You learn to live in the in-between spaces, not just the explosion, but the seconds before it, the hush, the vibration, the flicker in the air when everything knows something's about to break. When you've drafted contracts long enough, you know that power isn't in what you say, it's in what you leave behind, waiting for the right eyes to find it. By Thursday, 3 more people from PIL had viewed my profile. One of them worked in legal, another in strategic partnerships. The last one, the EVP of operations, big title, bigger implications. Still no messages, but I didn't need them to speak. I just needed them to read. Brent, meanwhile, was still on his LinkedIn bragging about breaking silos and cutting red tape. He posted a selfie from the new operations bullpen with a caption that said, "Sometimes progress looks like chaos until the results show up." Cute. I wondered if the results would still show up after a $150 million contract got iced. The whisper had begun. And like all good whispers, it wasn't meant for everyone, just the ones smart enough to listen. Brent's first real screw-up wasn't flashy. No headlines, no flaming trucks or scandalous HR leaks. Just a box, unchecked. A simple equipment compliance form tied to refrigerated freight units, boring as hell, unless you understand that one unchecked box flags you for a potential USDA violation, which flags your entire division for a possible federal audit. Which, for a logistics company operating across 28 states, is like accidentally inviting the IRS to your birthday party and handing them your diary. The form had been part of our internal redundancy net, triple-checked by compliance, time-stamped, filed, and backed up across 2 systems. But Brent, in his infinite wisdom, had recently removed what he called legacy friction points. Translation, anyone or anything that made him look less efficient on spreadsheets. So the form didn't go through. The client caught it. Not PIL, this was a different one, smaller but still big enough to have lawyers on speed dial. Carl tried to plug the hole with a cheerful all hands. Mistakes happen. What matters is how we respond. What mattered, actually, was that Brent had overridden a critical process and replaced it with an Excel template he found on Reddit. He hadn't even locked the cells. The logistics coordinator could have typed banana under hazardous material code and no one would have caught it. But still, Carl defended him. Called the feds overzealous. Said the form wasn't mission critical. I'm sure that went over great with the client whose perishable shipment was now frozen in quarantine, racking up penalties by the hour. Then came the hallway meltdown. A junior analyst, fresh out of state school and too scared to even update her Slack status, overheard Brent near the vending machines, smacking the keypad and muttering, "Why the hell did she make the insurance stuff so complicated?" That she was me. He said it like I'd left behind a curse, like the risk protocols were some kind of malicious Sudoku instead of the thing standing between them and financial obliteration. He ranted about outdated frameworks, about how lawyers shouldn't be allowed to write freight contracts, and how none of this makes sense unless you're trying to get someone fired. The analyst didn't say a word, but she told someone, and that someone told someone else. And by the end of the day, half the department was whispering about the clause. And me, I got a card, plain envelope, no return address. Just a crisp, old-fashioned thank you note, heavy cardstock, dark blue ink, actual cursive. Emily, still the smartest risk clause I've seen. You never needed their praise. Just time, Morris Levinson-esque. Rhett. Morris had been part of the client-side legal team during the 2021 renegotiation. We'd spent 2 months battling over phrasing, debating semicolons and subparagraphs, and bonding over our shared hatred of vague language. He retired the following year. I hadn't heard from him since, until now. The paper trail was doing what it was designed to do: protect in silence, expose when necessary. And Brent? He was running full speed into the walls I'd built not to trap him, but to keep the roof from caving in. He just never bothered to check the blueprints. The form incident didn't trigger a full audit, but it did force an internal review, and PIL was notified. Quietly, formally, with enough concern that Brent had to postpone his operations town hall webinar about revamping logistics for the next generation. I checked my LinkedIn again. 5 more views from PIL. 2 legal, 1 compliance, and a name I hadn't seen before: Rhonda Keller, Senior Risk Strategist. They were assembling their own paper trail now, looking for answers. And one clause tucked on page 73 was waiting to be read aloud. Not by me, by them. On a gray Wednesday morning, while Brent was probably sipping something called a collagen-forward green tonic, Precision Interstate Logistics sent a formal meeting request stamped urgent in red across the top of the email header. It landed in the inboxes of Carl, the board, legal and operations leadership just after 9:17 a.m. The subject line was unassuming: liability oversight review, immediate clarification requested. But the CC list, that was nuclear: 6 from PIL's legal team, 3 from corporate risk, their EVP of strategic partnerships, and one name that hadn't shown up on any of Midline's meeting logs in 2 years: Daniel Reeves, Chief Compliance Officer. The same man who'd personally signed the 2021 contract addendum with my clause in it, the one with my name in bold. Carl, of course, read the email and assumed it was about a late shipment to their Houston warehouse that had arrived 3 days behind schedule. He even told the board chair, "We'll calm them down, offer a discount, spin it as a trucking issue." Brent didn't say much. Probably Googled liability clause for logistics and hoped it'd be multiple choice. But 7.2 miles across town, in a sunlit cafe where the baristas wore flannel aprons and the muffins cost $6 each, I got a text from a number I hadn't saved but remembered immediately. Jason K., former client exec, left PIL last year after the merger shakeup. We'd sparred a few times during compliance calls, always respectful, always strategic. The kind of man who knew when to talk and when to hold his cards. His message was 3 words: "You watching this?" I didn't reply. Didn't need to. Instead, I refreshed PIL's company site. No changes. Checked Midline's press releases. Nothing. Then I looked at the clock, 10:02 a.m. The meeting had just started. Inside Midline's 14th floor boardroom, the tone was polite but icy. The PIL team entered not with notepads but with folders, printouts, tabs color-coded like they were preparing for court, not a conversation. Carl opened with a joke about traffic. No one laughed. PIL EVP began. "We've reviewed recent compliance issues stemming from the Ridgefield project, as well as subsequent communication gaps on liability reporting. There are several points of concern." Carl interrupted, smiling too wide, voice too loud. "We totally understand, and we take this seriously. We know the shipment delay was a black eye. Brent's already assembling a new process flow, and we," Daniel Reeves raised one hand. Calm, stern. "This isn't about Ridgefield logistics," he said. "This is about contract compliance. Specifically, Section 11.4 of the 2021 renegotiation. Silence. The kind of silence you can't fill. The kind that builds pressure behind the eardrums." Carl blinked. The general counsel, a woman who once told me I was too aggressive with indemnification language, began thumbing through her copy of the agreement like she was trying to find the fire alarm hidden in the text. "Brent?" He stared straight ahead, hands flat on the table like a kid caught cheating on a test he wrote himself. Meanwhile, back at the cafe, I stirred my coffee slowly, watching steam curl into the air like it was whispering secrets. PIL's team didn't call this meeting to vent. They called it to verify. And if they'd read what I think they had, there was no version of this ending that left Carl looking like anything but a man playing with matches in a room full of gasoline. Another text buzzed. "Jason K., clause has your name in it. You're about to be famous." I sipped. Not yet, but the fuse had been lit. Carl didn't read contracts. He skimmed them like a man skims an article he already disagrees with. Bullet points, bolded phrases, anything his brain could turn into a soundbite for the board. So when he got back to his office after the PIL meeting, red-faced and muttering about overreach and lawyers trying to play God, he pulled up the digital copy of the 2021 contract and hit Control+F. "Section 11.4, he barked. "Where the hell is it?" The general counsel, Lorraine, sharp, seasoned, and now visibly sweating through her silk blouse, hovered behind him. "That's not our standard numbering," she said quietly. "Looks like it was added as part of an amendment." Carl squinted. Amendment? Who the hell signed an amendment? Lorraine didn't answer because she knew. And now, finally, he knew she knew. The clause appeared like a ghost summoned by arrogance. Not hidden, just inconvenient, tucked between warranty exclusions and indemnity definitions. But there it was, clean, legal, unmistakable. Any alteration, reassignment, or removal of director-level risk oversight, including but not limited to roles defined in Exhibit C, without a 60-day mutual written notice, shall result in immediate breach of insurance liability agreement, and suspension of all related coverages. This clause is non-deligible and bound to named oversight officer, Emily R. Kane Dyer, of Risk and Compliance. Carl's lips moved as he read it like the words were too slippery to grasp. His finger jabbed the screen. Who let this through? Lorraine adjusted her glasses. This wasn't in the original 2019 draft. Looks like it was part of the 2021 PIL risk renegotiation. I didn't draft this version, Carl snapped. Well, who did? Lorraine didn't answer. She didn't need to. Carl's face went pale, then flushed again with that blotchy red rage that shows up when a man realizes he's not just behind, he's surrounded. Brent, meanwhile, wandered in halfway through the panic, holding a Red Bull and looking like he'd walked in on a live autopsy. They're not going to actually freeze the account, he said, half smirking, trying to reclaim the frat boy confidence that had worked so well in rooms where no one knew better. Carl seized the idea like a drowning man grabs a pool noodle. Exactly. We'll spin it, say it was a misinterpretation. Contracts get messy. They don't want to lose us either. Lorraine was still scrolling. This clause is enforceable. It's clean, it's signed, and it's embedded in the section tied directly to liability coverage. They'll blink, Carl muttered, pacing now. We're too big to drop. But even as he said it, something else was happening. Back in my apartment, where the air smelled like cinnamon tea and vindication, I refreshed Midline's company site and froze. Maintenance mode. All public-facing documents gone. All investor info grayed out. Contact forms disabled. They were trying to cover their tracks. Late, panicked, like putting a tarp over a flood. I checked the investor relations page. Offline, checked the executive bio page. Gone, checked the press center. 404. I could almost hear it, the clatter of consultants called in last minute, the legal interns rifling through archived PDFs, the executive assistants being screamed at for sending the wrong version. Carl had built a house on a fault line. Now the walls were groaning. Because the client hadn't just found the clause, they'd understood it. And understanding meant leverage. And leverage, once held, doesn't beg, it dictates. I got one more text that night, from Jason again. Lorraine looked like she'd seen a ghost. Carl's yelling about sabotage. Someone just asked where you're working now. I didn't answer. I just opened the bottle of wine I'd been saving for a day that never seemed to come, poured a glass, and let the silence stretch. Because in less than 12 hours, they'd be sitting across from the client again. And this time, Section 11.4 wouldn't be a whisper. It would be a detonation. They thought it was going to be a routine cleanup, a corporate fire drill. Hand out a few platitudes, smooth the client's feathers, maybe offer a discount on freight or some bloated value-added service nobody asked for. Carl even wore his navy blue crisis blazer, the one with the lapel pin he always pulled out when he wanted to look trustworthy without being specific. But the moment they walked into the precision boardroom, the tone was wrong. Too quiet. No coffee trays, no handshakes, no forced small talk about the Bengals game or quarterly synergies. Just a long, polished table with folders already placed at each seat. Branded, tabbed, heavy. Carl sat at the head like he still believed he belonged there. Brent took a seat to his right, jaw tight, fingers tapping a nervous Morse code on the armrest. Lorraine, legal, flipped through the folder like she was looking for a trapdoor. Across from them sat the EVP of Precision Interstate Logistics, Robert Geller. Tall, mid-60s, spine straight as a knife, reputation for being slow to anger but nuclear when lit. He didn't waste time. He opened his folder, pulled out a sheet, and read any alteration, reassignment, or removal of director-level risk oversight, including but not limited to roles defined in Exhibit C, without a 60-day mutual written notice, shall result in immediate breach of insurance liability agreement and suspension of all related coverages. He placed the sheet gently on the table, tapped the bottom of the page. Emily R. Kane, Director, Risk and Compliance typed. Signed, dated, stamped. Silence fell so hard you could hear the fluorescent lights buzz. Brent looked like someone had just read him his own obituary. His mouth opened once, then shut. He glanced sideways at Carl, who was blinking too fast, throat working up and down like he was trying to swallow a confession. Lorraine finally spoke. Quiet, hesitant, we didn't anticipate the scope of this language. There may be room for interpretation. Robert raised one hand. She stopped cold. This clause was drafted, approved, incorporated into the 2021 agreement with full knowledge of both parties. It is enforceable. Another executive leaned forward. And per our internal risk policies, this clause directly impacts all active insurance coverage related to high-value freight transfers, including bonded shipments and international cargo. Carl tried to find the floor with his eyes. Look, Bob, this doesn't have to be dramatic. Talking about a bureaucratic oversight. Surely you're not suggesting Robert didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Effective immediately until this is resolved to our legal satisfaction, our $150 million account is on hold. He let that hang, not under review, not pending renegotiation. On hold. Carl opened his mouth, then closed it. Brent leaned forward like he wanted to speak, but the only sound that came out was a dry swallow. Lorraine looked down at her copy of the contract, jaw slack, cheeks drained of color. The freight contract that made up over half of Midline's total annual revenue had just been shut off like a faucet. Not because of a market crash, not because of a strike, but because they removed the one person who had been the clause's guardian, and they did it without reading the fine print. Carl finally croaked, "What would resolution look like to you?" Robert didn't even blink. "Restoring oversight, in full, or renegotiating from zero, that's your choice." And then he stood. The meeting was over. Carl remained frozen in his chair, a man watching the sand in the hourglass run dry and realizing he'd used it all building castles instead of defenses. Brent looked at him like a kid looks at a parent who just confessed the tooth fairy's not real and Santa Claus is in collections. Back in my apartment, I received one new text. Jason K. They read the clause out loud. In full, Carl looks like he aged 10 years. I stared at the message, then turned my phone face down and walked to the window. Below me, the city buzzed, normal, unaware. But at the top of Midline's ivory tower, a bomb had gone off. Not loud, not messy, just precise, contractual and mine. They didn't even make it back to their own offices before the panic started. In the elevator ride down from Precision's conference floor, Brent leaned into Carl and hissed, "What the hell just happened?" Carl didn't answer. His phone was already buzzing, legal, finance, someone from investor relations asking why a $150 million revenue stream just turned into a brick wall. By the time they got back to Midline HQ, the board was on an emergency call. No pleasantries, no introductions, just tension thick enough to choke on. "Can we undo this?" someone asked, breath sharp through the speakerphone. "No," came the reply from a senior partner. His voice was low. "Final, she had us sign this in 21. It's enforceable, we all missed it." A pause, then, "You need to call her." They didn't say my name, but they didn't have to. Lorraine was already scrolling through her contacts. Carl hesitated. Brent offered, "I can." "No," Carl snapped, then softened. "Let me." He dialed. One ring, two, voicemail. He tried again, straight to voicemail. The tone of the room shifted from control to something that smelled like fear. As if they were realizing, for the first time, that the person they'd sidelined without ceremony might have just pulled the pin on the only grenade they'd never bothered to notice. Carl typed out a message, staring at the screen like it might explode. "Emily, we need to talk. Please call me. Let's fix this." He stared at the three little dots that never appeared, and me. I was sitting on a patio across town, sunlight spilling over the edge of my coffee mug, the kind with a chip on the rim I always used because it made things feel less perfect, more honest. Across from me sat a woman in a navy blazer, smart eyes, clipped tone. Her name was Dana, recruiter for Precision's legal division. She didn't waste time. "You've been on their radar since the 2021 renegotiation," she said, sliding a folder across the table. "We're just waiting for them to do something stupid." I smiled, not smug, not cruel, just satisfied. The kind of smile that only comes when everything you saw coming finally arrives, right on time. My phone buzzed. Carl buzzed again. "Brent, this one I didn't expect. Just 2 words, can we talk?" I silenced it. Dana kept talking about compensation, about oversight, about direct access to decision makers. I nodded, sipped, said nothing. Let her speak. I already knew the answer. I'd never needed revenge, just clarity. And now, Carl was drowning in it. They hadn't just fired me. They'd fired the person holding the only thread that kept their biggest client contract from unraveling. And now that thread was in my hands. I looked down at my phone one last time before placing it screen-side down on the table. Calls I'd never return. Voicemails I'd never listen to. Messages typed too late, by people who never once thought to ask what I'd built, only how fast they could replace me. Turns out some things aren't replaceable. Some clauses are binding, and some women, we don't scream, we draft, and then we wait. Appreciate you sticking around, you legends of the break room. Subscribe for more chaos. Let's make your old managers spill their coffee in fear.